Good evening and welcome to Economics Unbound. Tonight we bring you the much promised discussion on Operation Vul'indlela, which is a joint project of the National Treasury and the Presidency aimed at unlocking the potential of the South African economy to create jobs and to generate tax revenue. This is one of the showcase projects of this administration, and it is one of the urgent tasks identified in the recently delivered State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Growing the economy, however, requires business investment. It also requires public sector investment in the economy. So if you put the state on a spending diet and you belt tighten, you reduce public sector investment in the economy and adversely impact our potential for economic growth. Hello, dear viewer, and hello, Nana. I'm Tandeka Qubulembeki. Good evening.
Hello, Tans. You know that business confidence has been very low in South Africa, and it's gotten worse. But in economics, generally, private sector investment follows public sector investment. There is a direct correlation between increased public investment and the levels of business confidence to invest in any economy. It is as if public sector investment is an invitation to the private sector to do likewise and invest in the economy. But since our stats indicate that public sector investment has been low and languishing, private sector confidence has been particularly weak, and since the pre-COVID period, due to a failure to supply reliable electricity, water, telecommunications, and transport logistics to move goods and people, and policy paralysis, while dololo, no investment, low growth.
According to Deputy Minister of Finance David Masondo, in a recent article published in the Daily Maverick, one of the key drivers of Operation Vul'indlela is the concern for driving forward network industries. And these industries are important in reducing the cost of doing business and the cost of living in South Africa by lowering production costs, thus making South Africa attractive for investment. According to the Deputy Minister, David Masondo, that is, the implementation of structural reform to unleash South Africa's economic growth potential has been very slow. He says, as a result, the government has put together Operation Vul'indlela, which means open up the way, a joint initiative of the National Treasury and the President's Office to unlock economic growth and transformation.
He also says in a recent Daily Maverick article that he penned, the current coronavirus situation worsened the economic crisis, which shows itself in high levels of unemployment, poverty, and an impending fiscal crisis, which has the potential to precipitate the implementation of structural reforms and transformation. There are some reforms, such as the restructuring of Eskom, that are progressing well, and we are focusing our attention on those reforms which are progressing slowly or not at all. There are several reasons for the slow pace of implementation of reforms.
The reason for policy paralysis in our country is too much policy debate and contention. Now, he says that while there is a widely held view that South Africa is good at developing policies, but it is weak at implementing them, the reality is more complex and more nuanced, he argues. He offers the explanation that policies are often developed and approved at high level without deciding on the exact granular detail of how these are going to be implemented. More detailed policy questions often arise during the course of implementation, and then these are contentious and difficult to resolve. They can result in delays or even paralysis in implementation.
Tandeka, Deputy Minister David Masondo offers an example to illustrate the basic point he's making. He contends that some policy making is not contentious at all. For example, a policy decision is made in principle, but the complications emergency as the policy is being applied to a particular context, perplexing public individuals and necessitating often a return to the drawing board. He offers the introduction of new and private generation capacity for Eskom. He says that, similarly, while the reform to enable more private sector investment in embedded generation is not contentious, some of the detailed actions required to implement it are. There has been considerable debate about whether to raise the licensing threshold for embedded generation from 1 megawatt to 50 megawatts. Again, the debates are complex, with the need to reduce demand on the grid to address the immediate shortfall in electricity supply, juxtaposed with concerns about the readiness of Eskom and municipalities to manage increased numbers of grid connections for small-scale generators. In the meantime, private sector investment in embedded generation remains far below its potential, and load shedding continues. So, he says Operation Vul'indlela is meant to delve into the operational terrain, tackle and remove these kind of stubborn obstacles to economic growth.
Now, to unpack more, I'm joined by the Director of the Institute of Economic Justice, Dr. Gillard Isaacs. Good evening and welcome, Gillard.
Evening, thanks very much.
Now, what exactly does structural reform mean?
That's an excellent question. I think we can think about it on three levels. Which problems are we facing? What are the objectives that we're seeking? And which solutions should we be implementing? Now, the first problems here, I think everyone agree on. And
Hello,
Treasury's
please
focusing,
proceed. I think we're struggling a bit with your line, but please do proceed.
Okay, thanks. So I was saying that the issues and problems are apparent to all of us, whether it's in electricity, in freight transport, in digital, and so on. The understanding that these industries are unable to supply what is needed in South Africa is clear. Where it becomes a more contentious issue is around the objective and the solution. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the available information which we have at the moment, the objectives of these reforms is all framed around a
Carry on, please.
reduction in costs and an increase in competitiveness of these industries. Now, that's obviously important, but that's not the only thing which we might want. We might also want decent jobs in these sectors. We might want an electricity sector which is aimed at excuse me, sorry, a electricity plan with the climate concerns. So, what we have and what we're seeing from Treasury at the moment is a notion of reforms which is targeted at cost and at being competitiveness, and it is leaving out these other social ends. That then frames which type of solution we see. And some of these are uncontroversial, and others, such as privatization, corporatization, and so on, are incredibly contentious issues.
So you're basically saying that Treasury is very focused on the reduction of costs to the exclusion of the more social issues, which are equally important. So can you tell us what are these network industries and why are they the focus of Operation Vul'indlela?
So they've zoomed in on 4 industries, which is electricity, freight transport, which includes ports and rail, in water, and in digital communications. In addition, they've also looked at some overarching issues, in particular in skills and in visas, to enhance the ease of skilled personnel entering South Africa. So those are their main focus areas. And I think that those areas certainly show themselves to be problematic in South Africa. The question we need to ask ourselves, though, is not simply about creating these industries which operate more effectively, but what purpose should industries be serving in our economy? So, for instance, do we want a rail network which serves big mining, energy, for instance, or do we want a rail network which allows for small-scale agriculture in ex homelands to be able to reach cities?
So
there's
presumably you would want both, Gilad, so it means that they're going to take a long, hard look at resolving finally the Eskom issues, if you're saying electricity is one area of focus, to unblock whatever has been blocked there for many, many years. Then the second part is the sorting out of PRASA, because of the importance of rail to the Operation Vul'indlela, and then the sorting out of the communications portfolio because of the importance of digital communication and the issues of migration. So these are going to basically drive, they're going to be the main thrust of this administration's achievements in unlocking intentions in unlocking the economy. So how do you unlock these? Because there have been perennial problems for many, many years.
Well, you raised an interesting issue there, because in transport, you mentioned PRASA, but actually it is quite telling that it is Transnet which is the focus here, and PRASA, which is about passenger rail, really isn't featuring in the same way, right?
Oh,
so
that's
this once again speaks to the issues of which concerns, which sectors, and which objectives we are being centered. In terms of what needs to be done, I mean, these are four sectors which are each have their own issues, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all element. In electricity, there is no doubt a need for increased renewable generation.
Yes.
Whether that is from IPPs or from Eskom or has a community ownership element and so on, is a very important issue. And we don't see those type of things being answered in what we're hearing so far. In water, it's mainly about the ensuring the improved functioning of the existing water services. I think there needs to be an increased focus in climate change and adaptation.
Is there a crisis in the water area in our country? I've been seeing many cities and municipalities that are unable to deliver clean water and manage sewerage and things like that. The saga with the Vaal Dam is one case in point. Without sorting out the municipalities and the institutions that deliver clean and healthy water to citizens, how on earth do you move forward with Operation Vul'indlela?
Absolutely. And there's no doubt the infrastructure on a bulk water level is probably where there's less problems. When it comes to the interface between that and our homes and our businesses, there are a number of obstacles there. Once again, the solution which is going to be implemented is going to be framed by the objectives which are being sought. So
yes.
In Minister Masondo's article, for instance, we don't really get a sense of, say, increased water in township areas, right? And so it's unclear how the various priorities and what the objectives which these reforms are serving is being balanced.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's always fascinating having a discussion with you. Good luck with your institute at WITS.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
And now let's take a short break.
To fast-track the delivery of economic reforms, Operation Vul'indlela will be implemented as a joint initiative of the Presidency and the National Treasury, reporting directly to the President on a regular basis. It will work closely with the Cabinet's economic cluster to ensure that the priority interventions and key enabling reforms are implemented rapidly and continuously, as well as effectively, and that those responsible for their implementation will be held accountable. A National Economic Recovery Council comprising of relevant members of Cabinet will provide political oversight and enable rapid decision-making. As we now continue to manage the coronavirus down, a National Council for Economic Recovery will now come into its own to enable all the various tasks and interventions that we have identified to be properly implemented. The Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation remains the backbone of government reporting on the 5-year medium-term strategic framework. This will take place alongside the implementation arrangements which have been agreed among the social partners at NEDLAC. We will be releasing the NEDLAC Social Partner Economic Recovery Plan and the Social Compact for Energy Security. These contain very significant measures that we will be working with our social partners on to ensure that we do implement. A presidential working committee chaired by the President will meet regularly to receive reports from each social partner on the extent to which it has implemented its commitments. It will be supported by the Economic Recovery Leadership Team and working groups on particular areas of the recovery plan. In the aftermath of a fire, fellow South Africans, green shoots begin to emerge. The ashes that will have formed and reach the soil, and new life takes root to replace what was lost. Our country is emerging from one of the most difficult periods in living memory. South Africans have suffered and have made great sacrifices, sharing in their hardship with people all over the world. But as South Africans, we have a deep reservoir of resilience that we can draw upon. We have
For the South African economy to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a pressing need for the government to implement key structural reforms. It needs improvements in governance to enable efficiency in the delivery of basic services, alignment of the education system, and a responsive justice system are among them. Government expects the economy to grow by 3.3% this year from a contraction of 7.2% last year. With confidence and investments in the economy at a low level, government says it plans to make things better by removing structural constraints that obstruct growth. In the budget speech last week, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni said in the short term, structural reforms promote economic recovery, which will focus on speeding up expansion of electricity generation, creating jobs, rolling out infrastructure, and supporting manufacturing and beneficiation. Risks to grow include a new waves of infection and associated disruptions to economic activity. According to the Deputy Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Kuba Naidu, he says the inability to make trade-offs between competing interests is hampering the implementation of growth-enhancing structural reforms. During a web conference hosted by the University of Johannesburg, he says extreme inequality in South Africa that persists even after apartheid ended in 1994 actually means the country does not have a large enough middle class to play a stabilizing role in policy making. Some reforms proposed almost 2 years ago in a National Treasury policy paper focused to lift by 2 to 3% and create more than 1 million jobs over a decade, and the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan unveiled by the President Cyril Ramaphosa in October 2022 revived the economy after the damage done by the coronavirus pandemic. The economic devastation brought about by the COVID-19 hard lockdown has forced the government's hand. A program of economic structural reform has become imperative, not growing the economy, but to save it from destruction. Several warnings have been issued by bodies such as the International Monetary Fund and rating agencies that unless South Africa embarks on an urgent program, the country's economic crisis will only worsen. A draft economic recovery action plan worked out by President Cyril Ramaphosa and NADLEC has been touted as a blueprint to fast-track urgent structural reforms and stimulate economic growth. Cabinet has welcomed the establishment of Operation Vul'indlela, which will support the implementation of economic reconstruction and recovery plan by accelerating priority structural reforms to revive the country's economy. Over the past 10 years, real gross domestic product growth averaged only by 1.4%, only the population grew by 1.6% a year.
Thank you, Prudi. On Zoom now, I am joined by Bonolo Ramokele, and he's the Treasurer General of the Black Business Council. Welcome, Bonolo, and thanks for joining us on Economics Unbound.
Evening, ma'am, and evening to the viewers at home.
Thank you. What do you make of Operation Vul'indlela, and how do you perceive it?
Look, we do think that it is a welcome idea in the sense that, we've got great policies in the country, we've got great legislation, but one of the biggest problems that has been in place for years is that, coordination is a bit of a problem. Not only coordination within government, but also coordination between government and social partners, that is labor, business, as well as the broader community. And with this Operation Vul'indlela, you've got, we do hope that there would be more coordination and working together within departments, and also being focused, as opposed to try to do everything. We focus on the big ticket items, which is the issue of provision of stable electricity in the country, dealing decisively with the rollout of technology, as well as issues such as spectrum, and also, issues such as water and, road and transport infrastructure being rolled out so that it can be able to help in accelerating economic growth, and not only just economic growth for the sake of it, but economic growth that is evenly distributed, because for long we have had such broad and we've had such academic terms that do not yield tangible benefits for people on the ground. So we do support, as the Black Business Council, this initiative so that we can have better coordination, so that we can get the economy moving, especially after being hit by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, Bonolo, beyond the necessity for better state coordination and better communication and liaison between different state departments and different organs of state, there is the burning problem of the institutional capacity of in rail, Transnet, right? Transnet hasn't been as much a problem as Eskom has been, but the perennial Eskom problem needs to be resolved for Vul'indlela to have been a success, as well as the problems with the very bankrupt and badly run municipalities throughout the country on the water issues, as well as the parastatals involved in telecommunications and Centec, the SABC, and so on. Those institutions need rigorous sorting out and sectoral strategy plans for those institutions to operate in a new way and be reformed before you can achieve better connectivity in these industries. How do you think we will succeed this time after failing so dismally so often with our institutions and how they are constituted?
First and foremost, I think political will, needs to be there. And this is something that came across strongly in the State of the Nation address of the President. So there seems to be political will directly from the top. And also there seems to be, better, as we mentioned before, coordination from a cabinet level. So if there's political support for programs, you find that, they move much faster, on the ground as well as within the bureaucracy of the state. Now, if you go into some of the issues that you have mentioned, if you look at Eskom, we need to get Eskom right as a country. There seems to be some work that is being done there, although there are some issues that as black business in particular, we do have a problem with in how they are being done within the Eskom structure, in the sense that, whatever is being done there must not be done at the expense of black executives as well as black suppliers, etc. But we do need to get Eskom stable. Not just Eskom, but also open up the energy markets, which is being done, whereby municipalities that are capable, have got the financial muscle and the capacity to do so, will be able to generate their own electricity so that we can lessen the burden on Eskom. And also, when it comes to the issue of municipalities, look, there needs to be some harmonization processes that get done, because some of these local municipalities are not functioning and are not viable because they are too small and they are not able to actually sustain themselves. So there is a need to look at, the municipalities as a whole to say that which ones work, which ones do not, which ones do you combine, so that, they can be able to deliver services better in a much more efficient manner.
Now, Bunondo, here's my problem.
When it comes to the SOE project, there is a need to look at all of the SOEs and see which ones work and which ones do not. And we're grateful that you've got a Deputy Minister of Finance, such as Dr. Masondo, who has been clear in public pronouncements that we do need to look at, do we really need 700 SOEs, to be able to deliver services?
Bono, let me interrupt you there. Let me interrupt you there. There is a problem, however, because everything that you say just now needs to be done will require the allocation of more state funds and more state resources and skills. Now, in the event that we are now consolidating and we are belt tightening, now how is this all going to be done?
You don't want the state to be doing everything. That is why it's important to bring in all the social partners, with the labor as well as business coming to the fore. So, for example, you would have noticed that there was a paper that was published by National Treasury recently to look at reforming Regulation 28 of the Pension Funds Act, which would enable pension funds to invest into infrastructure. So some of these projects would then be, we believe that they should be funded by pension funds. Issues such as funding of telecommunications, networks, issues such as funding of electricity, grids, for example, because those are assets that we do need in order to be able to get the economy moving and companies to be able to get returns. So not all the money, will come from the state. It has never been so, even in the history of this country, that the infrastructure that you and I enjoy today was deployed solely by the fiscus or money coming in from the state. You do get private players coming in, And that is why this Operation Vul'indlela needs to be taken very serious, in the sense that if you're able to get all the social partners and the right political will is there, you will be able to be moving on these set network industries that have been identified to act as levers to get the economy moving.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Very clear views from you this evening. Thank you for those. Thanks a lot. Now let's take a short break again. Welcome back. On Zoom, I'm now joined by Professor Yanni Rousseau, and he's Professor of Economics at WITS, and also Saul Levine, who is the Executive Director of Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies, TIPS, and that is a body that works with DTI and does trade advisory and other industrial policy issues. Hello, Saul, and hello, Professor. Thanks for joining us. What do you make of Operation Vul'indlela? Let's start with you, Saul.
I think it's one of the very important initiatives that the government is undertaking. It's identified a number of cross-cutting issues that need to be addressed by the government and need to unblock challenges faced by industry, and also to address some of the constraints to create a more enabling environment in which businesses can operate.
And Prof, let's hear from you what your take on Operation Vul'indlela is and its significance to our country at this time.
I fully agree with Saul. Any initiative to get us on a higher growth trajectory and to get the economy to function better is, of course, a laudable initiative. It is important to note, however, that we've reached the point in South Africa's history where the government has run out of ability to deliver, and therefore the government will have to engage the private sector in order to deliver successfully, so that we can increase economic growth in South Africa and so that we can get jobs for our unemployed people.
So, Saul, we'll be seeing more public-private partnerships going forward, according to the professor. Can you explain how you guys are going about advising government to connect with the private sector and why this is a good way to proceed?
Well, I think the first important point is to understand what the private sector constraints are to growing their firms and investing in new capacity. So, the things that they've identified through Operation Vul'indlela, for example, are, the problems at the ports, the problems with water quality, the critical skills that are needed. These things, many of them do sit within the government domain, and they are public goods and public services, and do need to be addressed. Where there's opportunity to partner with the private sector on things like telecommunications and 5G, for example, which needs to come in and create an enabling environment for technology firms and other types of digital operations. These are new investments, they critical infrastructure that needs to happen, and Operation Vul'indlela has recognized that, we need to see more of these kind of investments that will see firms operating. But you, of course, partner with the private sector on putting in some of this new infrastructure.
Now, Prof, you are in the academy, and we've just seen the defunding of many of the critical skills that this economy will need. What do you think of this in light of the fact that Vul'indlela will require more critical skills, and the country certainly needs many of the skills that you produce in places like the University of the Witwatersrand?
Well, unfortunately, the government has its spending priorities completely wrong. I can use one example, my example that I like to use, namely SAA, the airlines. The government has spent billions of rands on the airlines. The SAA is nothing but the vanity project of the ANC. There's no reason why the country should have SAA. And money, for instance, spent on SAA could be spent much more effectively and efficiently, for instance, in the education sphere. I've said 6 years ago that the government should simply give SAA away they followed my advice back then, we would literally have saved billions of rands that could have been reprioritized and put to better use in other areas in the economy, such as education.
Unfortunately, our time was eaten up by another program involving the one-year anniversary of well, it's not much of an anniversary because it's the sad advent of COVID-19 in our country. But I want to give you just a few seconds each. If you were to summarize for the viewing public Operation Vul'indlela's promise to the nation in a few words, what would you say, Saul and then Prof?
In a few words, I would say that we need to support Operation Vul'indlela. It's an important initiative that's going to create some of the environmental conditions that are conducive for successful enterprises, and we need to start making sure that we have the right infrastructure that enables businesses to thrive in this country.
The last word is yours, Professor Rousseau.
I fully agree with Saul. Any initiative to move the country forward, to create jobs for the people in South Africa, and to get us on a higher growth trajectory is to be welcomed and should get our support.
Well, that's how we come to the end of our program this evening. And I have a special good night to say to Karima Brown. Good night, so long, Lala ngoxolo.